In today's episode of the Daily Brief, I'll talk about two interesting stories. I first talk about Novo Nordisk, and finally, I talk about water stocks. Welcome to the Daily Brief show by Zerodha, where our aim is to simplify the biggest news in the financial markets in a way that's one level deeper as compared to news channels. I'm your host, Akshara. Today is Thursday, 5th June. Coming to the first story, can Novo Nordisk actually defend its turf? Last week, we talked about the fascinating world of India's generic drug manufacturers. We spoke about how India had found a niche for itself in the pharma industry. Indian companies learned to puzzle out how to recreate drugs that global pharma majors had discovered. With that, they created an industry around selling those drugs to the world for cheap. While those efforts might make it cheaper for others to get the healthcare they need, naturally, not everyone's happy. Companies drain billions of dollars and many decades into creating a single drug. When they hit upon something valuable, they're willing to fight tooth and nail to protect their turf. Anyone who makes generic drugs, of course, comes right in their crosshairs. We saw this play out a few days ago. Novo Nordisk, the maker of blockbuster drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy, just went after two Indian companies, Dr. Reddy's Laboratories and OneSource Specialty Pharma, before the Delhi High Court. The claim was that these companies were making semaglutide, the active ingredient that makes drugs like Ozempic work without its permission, which is a violation of its patent rights. Here's everything you need to know to understand this case. Since the 1970s, scientists have been playing around with the drugs that hit the body's GLP-1 receptors to see what effects are caused. At first, they thought these would help with stomach ulcers. Somewhere down the line, they began taking it seriously for diabetes management. That's what it was intended for when semaglutide was first approved as medicine. As recently as 2021, Ozempic wasn't even in the world's top 20 best-selling drugs. But by the time this decade rolled around, Novo Nordisk had started realizing just how big a goldmine it was sitting on. By March 2021, in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, the evidence had become incontrovertible. Semaglutide helped people lose weight. It wasn't something you could only sell to people who were grievously sick. On the contrary, it was the answer to weight management issues, which was a problem that 43% of the world's adults dealt with. The company's potential market was orders of magnitudes larger than what it had once imagined. A flood of money soon started flowing in. Last year, Novo Nordisk saw its revenues rise to $40.6 billion. Ozempic became the world's second best-selling drug in 2024, losing only to the literal cure for cancer. But there's a problem. Others want a slice of this multi-billion-dollar pie as well. And they've spotted a key vulnerability because Novo Nordisk is soon slated to lose its legal monopoly over its weight loss drugs in much of the world. Under the standard rules of capitalism, if you run a business that mints a lot of money, others are allowed to copy whatever you do and take some of that money for themselves. This is by and large a good thing. A competitive market is simply better at keeping businesses on their feet and giving customers what they really need for the lowest possible cost. But this isn't an unalloyed good. If people create something completely new, you probably want to protect them from copycats. Without that, people will either keep any breakthroughs a secret from the rest of the world for fear of them being stolen, or worse still, they might not see any point in innovating altogether. And so, when people create something new, governments sometimes award them with monopolies through what's called patents. A patent guarantees that at least for a few years, 20 years usually, you're the only one who can sell your creation and earn money out of it. Think of patents as a bargain that society makes. If you come and tell us about your novel ideas, we'll keep them safe from your competitors for a few years. Of course, this can get complicated once you start to really think about it. Consider this, for instance. What do you really mean by creating something new? If you create something that's obviously an invention, like the world's first electric car, for instance, you can definitely patent it. But most patent applications are meant for things that are a lot more niche. Imagine that someone creates a special motor that uses an extra magnet to make electric car powertrains marginally more efficient. Have they really created anything? How would you even tell? Courts usually look at two criteria. One, what you're trying to get a patent over is novel, that is, it's never been seen before, and two, that it's non-obvious. That is, you've actually made an advancement of some kind instead of just hacking together something anyone could have come up with. But this too doesn't necessarily clear things up. You see this a lot in pharmaceuticals. Pharma companies basically make chemical compounds, and those allow for nearly endless variations. It's in the best interest of a pharma company to tell you that whatever change it makes is novel and inventive and should get a patent. They're chasing monopoly profits after all. But these variations are so specific that regular people would simply have no idea if they're worth patenting. Take Novo Nordisk. The company first discovered how to make a class of GLP-1 analogs. At this point, it tried to secure rights over a broad set of related chemicals that could all be made by swapping around different building blocks. It got patent protection over these until 2024. Soon afterwards, the company made a few changes, substituting an amino acid and adding a fatty acid on the side to specifically create semaglutide. These changes, it claimed, made the chemical more stable and made it easier to absorb. It got an additional patent over this until 2026. And those are just two. These are all the patents the company has in the United States. So is semaglutide truly new? Were these changes so inventive that they deserved a separate patent of their own? Do you really have something novel if you shift around a few dozen atoms in a molecule while keeping its hundreds of other atoms the same? How does one even begin to answer these questions? We genuinely don't know. We're a team of bloggers and YouTubers. We can't tell you the first thing about what's new or inventive about one of the most advanced drugs in the world. What we can tell you, though, is that billions of dollars hang on the answers to these questions. So, even for companies that make patented drugs, Novo Nordisk is in a weird position. For most of the life of its patent, it thought it had a monopoly over an excellent blood sugar medicine. The clock on its monopoly began all the way back in 2006. In most of the world, that clock would run for 20 years. That is, till 2026, unless it managed to negotiate extensions. And yet, only in the last few years did the company actually realize the potential of its drug. Despite discovering what might be one of the most important pharmaceutical molecules in the world, it barely had 5 years to cash in. Sales of the drug gathered most of its momentum in 2023. Novo Nordisk is yet to tap major markets. Until recently, for instance, it only planned to introduce semaglutide drugs to India in 2026. That is, incidentally, the very year it loses its patent rights over semaglutide in this country, as well as other massive markets like China or Brazil. Of course, others understand this only too well. A range of pharma manufacturers across the world have set their sights on that 2026 deadline. In China, for instance, at least 15 companies are trying to create something similar, with hopes of bursting into the scene as soon as Novo Nordisk's patent expires. Brazil's Hypera as well is working on a generic alternative to semaglutide. India, as the pharmacy of the world, has similar plans. Many of our own pharma majors are eyeing that space as well. In fact, Indian companies even took this fight to the United States. Last year, Novo Nordisk tried to sue Indian companies like Natco Pharma and Sun Pharma for patent infringement. In response, Indian companies threw their own counterpunches, opening up Novo Nordisk's American patents and asking the country's patent board to revoke them. The threat was real enough that Novo Nordisk settled, even giving out SOPs like an exclusive first to file status to some. One of the Indian frontrunners in the race to develop weight loss drugs is Dr. Reddy's Laboratories, one of India's biggest generic drug manufacturers. We had written late last year about its foray into the space. Last October, the company got a license from the Central Drug Standard Control Organization, or CDSCO, to start studying how it could replicate semaglutide. It then teamed up with OneSource Specialty Pharma, a CDMO, which we wrote about last week, to get its production line in place. Once semaglutide became fair game, it would be the first in line to make it. But soon they went even further, doing something particularly interesting. This April, 1 year before Novo Nordisk's patent expired, and before they got a license to sell anything from Indian regulators, they already began manufacturing the drug. This April, Novo Nordisk made a big announcement. It would advance its entry into India, launching in the next couple of months rather than waiting till next year, as it originally thought. Arch rival Eli Lilly had already made its entry, and the space was heating up too much for comfort. The company hoped to make the most of the last year of its protection. Dr. Reddy's greeted the announcement with a court case. On May 14th, Dr. Reddy's went to the Delhi High Court claiming that Novo Nordisk's patent over semaglutide should be revoked. They claimed that the company already had a patent on GLP-1 analogs where all its real innovation happened. But that patent had expired in 2024. Semaglutide, they argued, added nothing. This was just an attempt at evergreening, where pharma companies keep filing newer and newer patents to extend their monopoly over a drug. If it succeeds, it would basically nullify any first mover's advantage Novo Nordisk had in the country. On May 26th, Novo Nordisk countered by filing its own lawsuit before the Delhi High Court. It claimed that Dr. Reddy's was out to breach its patent rights over semaglutide. It was manufacturing and exporting the drug without permission, essentially ignoring its patent rights. On May 29th, the Delhi High Court came out with a temporary set of rulings, what lawyers call an interim order. Here's what it decided. For now, Dr. Reddy's can't sell semaglutide in India. At the same time, Dr. Reddy's can produce semaglutide here as long as it's only making the drug to sell abroad. Basically, Novo Nordisk has ensured that Dr. Reddy's won't step on its turf as far as the Indian market is concerned, but it failed to protect them from going after other markets where it doesn't have the same patent protections. As it stands, Dr. Reddy's could potentially start by exporting generic GLP-1 drugs, build up its competence, and then grab the Indian market as soon as it has the legal clearance to do so. Now, this isn't the court's final take on the issue. The court's simply telling everyone what to do while it takes time to mull over things. Novo Nordisk, though, isn't happy with this halfway compromise. Under the law, it believes if you have a patent over something, it's not just that others can't sell it, they can't make it either. This isn't completely unfounded. In similar cases in the past, the Delhi High Court has stopped companies from manufacturing patented drugs for export, even though they weren't selling anything here. But none of that will matter if Dr. Reddy succeeds in getting its patent cancelled in the first place. So, what happens now? Frankly, when we started learning about India's pharmaceutical generics industry last week, we didn't expect to see such a perfect demonstration of how the incentives of different players lie. Because the truth is, the position of both sides is a simple product of what they do. Novo Nordisk is doing what any company in its position would do. It's trying to defend the commercial edge it has on a proprietary innovation that's become unexpectedly valuable. And Dr. Reddy's is doing what generic manufacturers have always done, pushing at the legal limits of what's protected and what isn't, hoping that when the dust settles, they're in a position to rip through the industry. The Delhi High Court has some tough decisions before it. It will now have to decide whether the patent over semaglutide is one that ought to be enforced, and if so, where do the limits of those rights lie? But even if the court sides with Novo Nordisk for now, its monopoly will be short lived. Come 2026, the patent will expire, and Indian companies will almost certainly enter the market. The only real question is, will Novo Nordisk be able to get its foot through the door before that happens? Coming to the next story. There are plenty of everyday essentials we barely think twice about. Take utilities, for example, electricity, internet, phone calls. These are things we use daily without even noticing. But behind each flick of a switch or tap of a phone screen, there's an entire world of companies, governments, and individuals working tirelessly to make these conveniences possible. It's genuinely fascinating once you start peeling back the layers. Of late, over at the Daily Brief, we've been going down a series of these rabbit holes. Recently, we explored telecommunications and were blown away by all that happens behind the scenes just so we can understand how you effortlessly talk to a friend or stream your favorite show. And today, we ended up looking at something even simpler. Where does our water come from? See, lately we've seen companies like VA Tech Wabag and Ion Exchange pop up in conversations and news headlines labeled as promising water stocks. But to be honest, when we tried to understand exactly what these companies do, we felt pretty lost. There was so much technical jargon and complex background information required just to make sense of how water even gets from one place to another. So we decided to start from the basics. We asked ourselves some fundamental questions. How does water actually flow into our taps each day? What happens to it after we use it? And where exactly do these water stocks fit into the entire water cycle? And beyond that, we wanted to understand the companies that are part of this journey and how they make their money. Here's what we learned. So, how does water come to your tap? It's easy to take water for granted. Turn the tap and out flows clean, clear water. That's about as much as most people think about it. Or are we just letting our privilege show? But behind all that simple convenience is a remarkable journey. It starts from a faraway water source, often in a river, a lake, or deep underground in an aquifer. That raw water, still full of natural sediments, microbes, and all sorts of invisible impurities, is first drawn into what's called a water treatment plant or WTP. Here, that water is cleaned up. First, the water is screened to remove larger debris like leaves, sticks, or stray plastic wrappers. Next comes a fascinating chemical process called coagulation and flocculation, a fancy way of saying tiny particles are encouraged to clump together, forming larger pieces that settle down easily. Then the water moves through filtration, usually layers of sand and gravel that capture even smaller impurities, leaving the water clearer than before. But it's not ready yet. To make sure it's safe to drink, the water undergoes disinfection, where chlorine or ultraviolet light eliminates harmful bacteria, viruses, and microbes. Once thoroughly cleaned, the water is tested rigorously pressurized, and finally pushed out into a vast underground network. This intricate maze of pipes, pumps, valves, and reservoirs, often stretching hundreds of kilometers, channels water directly into our homes, offices, factories, and farms. And that's how water finally arrives at your tap. Or that's at least how it's supposed to happen. Some of you might live in places without this critical piece of infrastructure, depending on water mafias to drive by with tankers full of water. But let's leave that aside for now. Anyway, the story doesn't end once water gets to your house, because once that water's been used, whether it's washing your hands, doing the laundry, or flushing the toilet, it becomes wastewater. This is dirty, used, and potentially hazardous if left untreated. So it enters another hidden system, the sewers. These underground pipelines collect all that used water and channel it to another facility, the wastewater treatment plant. And yes, we get it. This bit of infrastructure is missing too in most of our country. Once again, let's leave that aside. The process here is kind of like running the dirty water in reverse. First, the big stuff, think sanitary waste, food scraps, or even grit from the street, is removed. What's left then flows into settling tanks. Here, heavier metals sink to the bottom and oily scum floats to the top. Next, the water meets an army of microbes, tiny bacteria specially cultivated to munch on the remaining organic matter. These little helpers are given oxygen and time to do their job, breaking down waste into safer components. Once their work is done, the water goes through another round of settling and then, depending on the plant, an extra step of filtration and disinfection. At the end of all this, what was once wastewater is now treated effluent, clean enough to be released into a river or lake or even reused for irrigation, construction, or industrial cooling. So, what happens to all the solids and sludge? Those go through a different process entirely, often turned into compost, fertilizer, or even biogas for electricity. Where exactly are these water stocks? Okay, we admit that that was quite a deep dive. But trust us, this context was necessary. Here's why. In India, water is considered a public good. Managing both water supply and wastewater treatment falls under the responsibility of local municipalities and state governments. Essentially, they're the ones making sure water reaches your home and that your wastewater is treated safely. But governments and municipalities can't handle everything alone. The infrastructure needed, pipes, pumps, valves, massive treatment plants, is extensive and often highly specialized. Sometimes they struggle to get this together. But even if they do their job perfectly, a lot of this requires private companies to pitch in, or as the stock market calls them, water stocks. These private companies step in at every stage, from sourcing water from rivers or underground aquifers to treating it and finally discharging it safely back into rivers or lakes. They help governments by designing, building, operating, and even maintaining this infrastructure. So here's how that plays out practically. Imagine a city needs a new water treatment plant. A private company will offer its expertise to design and build that plant, providing engineering, procurement, and construction, or EPC services. We wrote about this recently. Once built, the same company might even run and manage the project for several years. Meanwhile, other companies might supply the specialized equipment or provide chemicals for treating water or even consulting services to ensure the plants are efficient and compliant with regulations. Usually, these companies cater to the government, central and state governments, as well as local urban bodies like municipal corporations, water supply, and sewage boards. These entities typically oversee major water projects. They plan service coverage, set tariffs for consumers, and secure funding. Private companies simply plug into the ecosystem they create. But apart from plugging into government infrastructure, sometimes private companies also cater directly to industries that must treat their wastewater before safely releasing it into the environment. Once again, they provide not just physical equipment, but also critical services and chemicals needed to purify water to strict standards. Simply put, anywhere there's water infrastructure involved, there's likely a private company working behind the scenes to make it possible. While these assets and infrastructures typically remain under government ownership, it's these private players that truly make the whole ecosystem function. And that's the big investment opportunity behind water stocks. We aren't huge fans of tossing around big numbers just for the sake of it, but here the scale is the story. The Indian water industry, covering everything from water treatment technologies and essential chemicals to EPC and ongoing operational services, is valued approximately at $13 billion, and it's expected to grow steadily at around 6% per year over the next decade. A lot of the sector's future depends on government policy. For example, the Jal Jeevan Mission 2019 to 2024 for rural water supply and the Amrut scheme for urban renewal have both allocated massive budgets to build out water supply systems and sewage treatment facilities across India. These schemes often come with guidelines that encourage engaging private firms via tenders, while the funding is largely public, center or state grants. If you're evaluating what happens to the sector, these schemes are a good place to start. So let's talk companies. The Indian water infrastructure ecosystem includes a mix of dedicated water companies, diversified infrastructure firms, and niche technology providers. Some of the major players, especially those listed on stock exchanges, are VA Tech Wabag Limited. Wabag specializes in the design, engineering, and operation of water and wastewater plants with over 6,500 projects completed globally. The company positions itself as a technology focused EPC and operations and maintenance or O&M player rather than a civil construction firm. In fact, Wabag's strategy in recent years has been to go asset light and high tech. It prefers to focus on things that require intellectual capital, process design, engineering, and equipment integration, while subcontracting the actual civil works. Wabag O&M order book provides it a source of recurring revenue. In such contracts, companies operate plants for decades and recoup their investment through periodic payments, either by the government, example the city pays per liter of wastewater treated, or directly from consumers or users through tariffs, less common in water in India due to lower water tariffs. Almost 45% of its order backlog is O&M contracts, balancing the 55% EPC portion. This recurring income smooths out the lumpiness of the revenues it earns from projects. O&M orders let companies run. Unlike Wabag, which is primarily project focused, Ion Exchange does a little bit of everything. It manufactures ion exchange resins, membranes, and water treatment chemicals. It supplies water treatment equipment and it undertakes turnkey projects, EPC, and O&M services. The company serves industries, institutions, homes, and communities, covering everything from large plants to household water purifiers. Here are some other notable players. Infrastructure EPC firms. Companies like Larsen& Toubro or L&T, SPML Infra, and newly listed EMS Limited undertake water supply and sewage projects for cities. Equipment and component manufacturers. There's a large set of companies that create the equipment needed for water infrastructure. These include pump makers like Kirloskar Brothers or Shakti Pumps, a business with healthy margins. There are also valve and piping companies. Welspun Corp, for example, is a big player in manufacturing pipes used in water projects with a robust order book for water pipelines. Similarly, Josh Engineering provides water control gates, screens, etc., used in treatment plants and dams with very high profitability on those niche products. Now, we know we completely skipped different business models that companies operate in or various technologies they're working on. This is just meant to get you started with the basics. India's water infrastructure sector is unlike the same sector elsewhere in the world. We're still a country that's building out our pipelines. And so, players in the sector are high growth and policy driven, in contrast to the more mature, steady state sectors in developed economies. And that's why India offers a unique chance in a sector that most would overlook, a chance to participate in building essential infrastructure for a sixth of the world's population. This is a place where you can buy into India's development sector while also optimizing for significant business potential. We're a long way from living in a country where every Indian has access to clean water. And eventually, it's these water stocks that'll get us there. Now, coming to the tidbits. Yes Bank has approved plans to raise up to rupees 16,000 crore, comprising rupees 7.5 thousand crore through equity and rupees 8.5 thousand crore via debt in Indian or foreign currency. The total equity dilution, including any conversion of debt into shares, has been capped at 10%. This capital raise follows a major deal last month where Japan's Sumitomo Mitsui Banking Corporation, or SMBC, agreed to acquire a 20% stake in the private lender for rupees 13.48 thousand crore. The SMBC transaction, involving 8 existing shareholders, including SBI, is being touted as the largest cross-border M&A in India's financial services sector. While the bank has not disclosed the specific use of the funds, the twin moves reflect a significant capital and strategic development for the institution. Maruti Suzuki India Limited has commissioned 2 new solar projects totaling 30 megawatt peak, 20 megawatt peak at its Greenfield Karkoda plant and 10 megawatt peak at its Manesar facility, raising its total installed solar capacity from 49 megawatt peak to 79 megawatt peak within a year. This marks a 61% year-on-year increase in captive solar power generation. The company has outlined a roadmap to expand its capacity further to 319 megawatt peak by FY 2030 to 31. Supporting this transition is a planned investment of Rs 900 225 crore. Maruti Suzuki aims to meet 85% of its electricity needs from renewable sources by the end of the decade. The initiative also aligns with Suzuki Motor Corporation's Global Environment Vision 2050 and reflects a broader focus on green energy procurement alongside self-generation. Schloss Bangalore has received an allotment from the MMRDA for an 8,412 square meter plot in Mumbai's Bandra Kurla complex or BKC to develop a 250-key luxury hotel. The lease period is set for 80 years with a total lease premium of Rs 1,302 crore. As per the terms, 25% of the lease premium is to be paid within 2 months, while the remaining 75% will be paid over the next 10 months. The land allotment has been made to Schloss Bangalore and its consortium partners, whose names were not disclosed. This development coincided with Schloss's stock market debut, where shares listed at Rs 406.50 on the BSE, marking a 6.55% discount to the IPO price of Rs 435. The project is part of the company's expansion into key urban luxury markets. That's all the news I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching and see you in the next one.
Disclaimer: this content is for informational purposes only. None of the stocks, brands, or products mentioned are recommendations or endorsements.